What is a fate worse than death? Everything leading up to dying in the ICU. Families of 85-plus-year-olds with multiple comorbidities force us to keep doing everything to keep people alive far beyond any chance of recovering with any quality of life or dignity. Ever done CPR on a frail old body that weighs 95 pounds? The feeling of the cartilage and ribs crushing under your hands is something we never forget. After a few rounds of compressions, you can see a very obvious cavity in the chest that we have smashed into oblivion. And all for what? So the person can die in misery? Often, these people have written do not resuscitate and do not intubate requests. But the family can override these once the patient is unable to participate in the conversation. Then we get people 85+ years old with catastrophic strokes. Family decides to do everything. So the patient ends up with a track, hole in the neck, on a ventilator, breathing machine, a PEG tube in the stomach for liquid tube feeding, and resigned to bed rest for the remaining miserable months of their life. They will probably ultimately die of a steady but slow weight loss. Horrible infected wounds from prolonged immobility. I have seen bed sores down to the bone and large enough to fit my fist in two. Or infection, like pneumonia. All for what? Then you get the younger ones. But the ones who are far past any sense of recovery. Some of the worst to watch are people with liver failure from alcohol abuse. They go through severe and difficult to manage alcohol withdrawal, in which they are confused, combative, and hallucinating. They are often sedated to the best of our ability and restrained for their own safety. Then come the bleeding problems associated with liver failure. I've seen someone go from talking to me and laughing to dying by vomiting all of the blood from their body due to esophageal varices. Bleeding arteries in the throat, stomach. It looked like a murder scene. And that the patient was awake and aware she was dying as she bled out in front of us. So if you talk to anybody who works in critical care, they will often have many examples of things worse than death. We essentially torture people every day. We see that slow, inevitable spiral down. We try our best to be realistic with patients and families. But it often doesn't work. Edit. I apologize for the graphic nature of this post and the personal stories it has made some of you relive. In general, end-of-life discussions and decisions are hard. It's important to talk about these things with aging family members. Be very clear in advance directives about what you or your loved ones want. If you designate a POA, make sure that person very clearly understands what you would want done. Dying is not the worst thing that could happen. It isn't always. Giving up. Our bodies are not meant to live forever. Also, thanks everyone for the awards. Locked-in syndrome. Being burned alive. I saw a guy that was playing with gasoline get burned alive. The smell and sounds that he made were something I will never forget. Luckily it only lasted him a few minutes before he passed out. But the next 10 years and hundreds of surgeries were terrible. He said many times we should have let him die. Locked-in syndrome. You're conscious, but unable to move or communicate with the outside world. That seems like it would really suck. Being forced to live in a vegetative state on life support because your friend's family won't let you go. Being the child in a child sex trafficking situation. Being the middle piece in the human centipede. Separating you from all the living things and putting you into a confined room with a giant mirror and the lights on full brightness 24/7. Having to deal with the pain of radiation for a long period of time. Hisashi Aochi. Yes, that's his last name. Is an example of this. He had to deal with the pain after being exposed to a fatal dose of radiation after a nuclear power plant accident. He was kept alive for 83 days after the accident. God. I can't imagine the pain he had to endure. I think that having a child disappear and never knowing what happened is likely the worst thing in the world. Holding out hope. Never knowing when it is appropriate to stop looking. Even when your despair seems too much to bear for even one more day. You know that killing yourself would end any possibility of being reunited. Edit. Definitely the post with the most despair quotient that I have received gold for. But thank you. Fatal familial insomnia. Being skinned alive. Edit. Who the fuck gave this a wholesome award? Being the only survivor. You carry the guilt of not being able to save everyone. Seeing everyone close to you die. It makes you wish you died with them. Being paralyzed and blind for your whole life. Torture or slavery for about 80 years. Being in an infinite death loop and no way of escaping. Correga Requiem Da. Locked in a room and forced to watch The View. At high volume. All day. Every day. Read up on Junko Furuta. Prolonged solitary confinement. Wishing to die but not being allowed to. Edit. Wow. I did not expect this wave of responses. Thanks for the love and support, guys. I truly appreciate it. Just to clarify, I'm going pretty well at this point in my life. The reason why I said this is because this was something that I had been going through quite badly some time ago, and I know that we've all felt this urge in some shape or form. As much as I wanted to end things when it got too much, I knew deep in my heart that I would hurt too many people in my life and that it's not my time to go just yet. Right now, my mindset is stable and I have an amazing girlfriend who's my biggest support pillar and my best friend. My heart goes out to all of you who have or are feeling this sensation right now. Trust me when I say this. The bad times shall come, but they are not here to last. Reach out to those you trust if you can and ride it through to the end. Roman used to erase people from history as a punishment worse than death. It was called damnatio memoriae from a philosophy Pav is horrible, and I think I would be horrified to be condemned to this sentence, but I think the worst is probably to live a life of misery by being slaved and tortured. True immortality. Hear me out. If you were truly immortal, that is, you could never die under any circumstances. You'd outlive everyone. Even if you got close to someone, they'd be dead in what, to you, would feel like the blink of an eye. Given enough time, I think this has a good, if not 100% chance of driving you insane. Eventually, you'd outlive the human species. When humans went extinct, you'd have no one to talk to. Forever. Now you would certainly go insane. Oh. And the worst part is still ahead. In trillions and trillion of years, the universe's stars will all have exhausted their supply of nuclear fuel. And the universe will reach heat death. Now there is nothing but you on a cold, inert, dead sphere. Now you get to endure this for all eternity. Sorry for the abject depression. Needing to poo right after you take a shower. Having heart attack mid-jerk off and being found with a dick in your hand. Now with COVID going around, old people who are suffering from it and fighting for their lives for 2 or 3 weeks in the hospital. Knowing they aren't getting better. Dying slowly without having contact with family or friends because they don't have a cell phone or etc. Suffering for weeks and eventually dying seems horrible. Not only from COVID but also from cancer. There's like an infinite amount worse fates. For example, a Turkster god just turns you into a sentient rock and drops you off in a wasteland. That's it forever. You're still you can think and have senses, but you can't move because you're trapped as a rock. You just sit there forever staring into the wastes and try to occupy yourself. You can't die. You can't sleep. All you can really do is think. Eventually you'll be buried and won't be able to tell what time it is. Eventually. You would hope to yourself. The sun will explode and my stony form will be destroyed by the solar fire and end my miserable excuse for an existence. Probably life in prison. Just a completely pointless existence. Uncontrolled schizophrenia. A lifetime of explosive diarrhea. I think Metallica summed it up pretty well in one. That's certainly worse than death. DIPG. It's a cancer of the brainstem that mainly affects children. The brainstem controls the most basic functions of life. Breathing, heartbeat, etc. Mike the Headless Chicken lived on because he still had a brainstem. As the cancer progresses, it takes more and more of the kids' abilities while keeping their personality and intelligence intact. Imagine being 7 or 8 and one day you can walk and the next you can't. Or one day you can swallow and the next you can't. All the while you're still all there in your head, so you know everything that's going on. DIPG is considered terminal at diagnosis. Neil Armstrong's young daughter died of it before he went to the moon. Being forced to watch your children brutally murdered and then being brainwashed into believing that it was your fault. Being eaten alive by an animal. Burying your children. Being denied death. Balls caught in the zipper. How do we actually know if death is really that bad or not? It could be amazing. There is a story about a fireman, which I admit, I cannot verify, who received third-degree burns over pretty much his entire body. After almost a decade of pain and skin grafts and looking like something out of a horror film. His doctors asked him if it was worth it. He replied that he wished he had died that day. being suicidally depressed for well over a decade, making an amazing recovery and turning your life around, getting a very few good years, then developing early onset Alzheimer's, dementia that makes you believe you're back in your depressed years for the rest of your life. Well, that's it for Reddit today. Going to go hug my kid. Severe chronic fatigue to the point where you can't live your life and barely recognize yourself anymore. You can barely get up to go to the bathroom. You lose all of your friends. Being alive is miserable because even trying to watch a TV show is too hard due to the severe brain fog you're experiencing. Nothing is enjoyable, but you're not going to die. No. You'll live a long life of being unable to function and dismissed by doctors who tell you graded exercise is the only answer, despite that being from one flawed clinical study that was later disproven. You constantly question your sanity because your condition is typically blamed on your mental health. You grieve the loss of yourself. You decide maybe you are to blame. Somehow. But you're so tired you can barely finish a sentence. So therapy is also a struggle. Mine finally got better when they found out I had a very large aneurysm in my renal artery and surgically fixed it. They told me it wouldn't help my fatigue, but they were incorrect. The year I spent in bed was terrible. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome as well. So I'm always dealing with various issues and I'm hyper aware this could happen again, and my functioning is not a guarantee. Many folks are not as lucky and never make progress. Being stuck behind slow people. Forever.